If you want to be able to find your players' characters quickly and easily on a scene, and you want to be able to have all kinds of useful information about them ready at your fingertips, then you need today's module, Monk's TokenBar. Hey everyone, this is Zephyr, and welcome to the Bailey channel, where we teach everyday DMs how to create truly amazing experiences for their players by combining art and technology. We also make modular systems and scenes for Foundry Virtual Tabletop that you can use without any setup. Some of those are going to be the backdrop for today's video, where we're continuing our series on the top 25 most popular modules with Monk's TokenBar. This module is a really helpful little tool. On the surface, it is a great way to keep track of your players, their characters, and some important information about them. But there are also some other really great features that are a little bit below the surface. Requesting roles, customizing the types of information that you can see on those particular characters, assigning experience, controlling movement abilities, and a variety of powerful integrations, such as the ability to turn defeated enemies into a pile of loot for your party to scoop up and happily throw in their bags. If that piques your interest, then join us as we cover the ins and outs of Monk's TokenBar, the number 19 most popular module for FoundryVTT. We're going to start off with a showcase of all the different features, gradually getting a little bit more advanced as we go, and then we'll wrap up with these settings. And these settings in particular, you probably want to stick around for, because there are a lot of things in there that are some hidden gems of extra features, and also some things that can interact with systems and modules that you want to be aware of. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in. For the main features of Monk's TokenBar, we've got a few. Most things are going to be related to the namesake token bar here, and this is displaying Angus, Gomer, and Ventress. These are all player characters that are owned by actual players. So if I open up my sidebar here for actors, you can see if I go into the configure ownership for Angus here, there is a player named Angus who is the owner of Angus, and the same is true for Gomer and Ventress. But then I have this mystery man that is a player character type actor, but if I look at the ownership, it's not owned by anyone. So it is not going to be considered kind of a player token in this instance. And if I drag it out, nothing's going to happen. But if I change the ownership to make all of the players an owner, and then drag the mystery man out, he will be added to the bar here. This is not exclusive to the player character type of actors, and this will vary a bit from system to system, but we can just make an example here, and I'll make this a non-player character. And basically the things that it's checking for is that players are owners, at least a player is an owner. And then we also need to make sure on the prototype token that the disposition is friendly. You can see here that test has now appeared. So again, the token bar is going to display all tokens on the scene that have a disposition of friendly and are owned by at least one player. By default, unless we change that in the settings, that's going to be regardless of whether that player is online or not. So then here, let's take a look at what these actually tell us. So you'll notice that we have two icons here. We've got a shield and then an eyeball. And then next to them we have 15 and 11 for Angus, 9 and 11 for Gomer, and 13 and 9 for Ventress. These are going to correspond to the armor class and passive perception, respectively, of each of these actors. And that is going to be what's tracked by default in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition here. But you can look at those at a glance, so this is really nice if you are not using a lot of automation or anything like that, and you want to just know those things off the top of your head, especially if you're doing a lot of theater of the mind, etc. So you have those tracked. Then if we click on any of these tokens, it will pan to them. This is particularly helpful. As you can see here, Ventress is under a roof, and it pans to him. It selects him and then moves us to him, so we can find out exactly where he is. So really helpful if you've got roofs or if you have a multi-leveled scene using levels. And we'll also notice that the panning is purely panning. There is no zoom here, so it will respect whatever zoom distance you had configured already. In addition to being able to pan to the different characters, you can also double click on their portraits in the token bar to open up their character sheets. So this is particularly nice if you are trying to really quick look at something in more detail. Then we have these movement controls over here. And we're normally going to be in free movement, which just allows players to move their characters whenever they like. Then we also have no movement, which will prevent players from moving, pretty much the same as if the game was paused. And then finally, we have an option that we can't turn on right now because we're not in combat, but it is combat turn mode. So whenever you have the initiative tracker open, if you have this enabled, then it's going to force players to only be able to move during their turns. We'll demonstrate some of the combat things and movement here in a little bit, but I want to then touch on another really key feature amongst TokenBar, and it's going to be the request roles options. So first, we have just regular old request role. It's going to open up this dialog for you as a GM. So here you can choose what kind of role you're asking for. So in this case, maybe it's a perception check. Then you can also set a difficulty class. And you can choose whether or not that's going to be shown to your players. And then you have the role mode, which is going to be public role. Everyone sees it, everything. And then you have public role, where the results are hidden. So everyone can see that a role was made, but only the GM can actually see what was made on that roll. So in this case, Ventures and everyone else would know that they rolled a perception check, but only the GM actually sees just how well Ventures did. Then we have private roll, where only the people who are making the roll know that a roll is happening, but the results are hidden from everyone but the GM. And then we have the GM only roll. So this is a truly secret roll where only the GM knows that the roll was made and the results of the roll itself. So this is a tool you have for maybe making some subtle checks here and there, and you have that as an option. Also choose whether to hide NPC names if you have multiple people involved here. And you've also got any flavor text you want to add. And again, we have this array of rolls that you can make. You can select just death saving throw up here at the top, ability checks, saving throws, or skills. And then you can also choose whether there are dice involved or not. For the actors section, it's going to normally start with just whatever your selected token is. So we have the add players option, which is going to add all of the player characters that are on the scene. And then we also have the add token bar option, which will add everything that's in our token bar. A lot of times these are going to overlap, but the players will only add player characters that are owned, as opposed to the token bar might also include, say, a NPC type actor that the players own, whereas the add players would not. So we have add last token selected, so just whatever the last batch was. Then if we clear all with the trash can here, you also have add actor, which is just adding whatever your currently selected actor is. So that's how you can choose all of those aspects. And then let's go ahead and put everyone in here and do a perception check. And here you can also have this copied or saved as a macro. Copy is just going to give you a wall of text that you can then paste in. And save will generate the whole macro for you. And then you have the option of doing a request with roll or request. Request with roll just automatically rolls the dice. So if you select that, it's going to go ahead and roll all of our dice. And as you can see, functions perfectly with Dice So Nice. And in here, we can see the results of each of the players. And then at the bottom, if you have multiple people included, you'll see that has the group DC, or the group result, of being a 9. So it will automatically tell you the average if you wanted to know for a particular group check or something like that. And then if we go back into the roll here, we'll do just the same thing, and this time I'll include the DC as well. And if we just hit request, it's going to play that sound, and you can configure that in the settings. And then that will let your players know, like, hey, you have something to do over here in chat. And then you'll see that you have these buttons, and they can also, if they have some situational thing where they can add advantage or they get disadvantage, then they can also click on a plus or minus respectively. and they can just click to roll the dice or open up the particular option here. And here we can see that again, group DC is displayed, and if you notice throughout that, the average was updating in real time as we went through. And here, since I actually had the DC set, it is giving us the checks indicating whether or not the roll was failed or succeeded. And you can also manually adjust that if you want to treat it a certain way or you want to display it in a certain way to the players. When it comes to the rolls as well, you can use hotkeys, Alt-R, to open up the request roll dialog here. And again, you have all of those same options that we discussed previously. And if you want it to be a GM roll, so one that only you see, there's a hotkey of that of Alt plus Shift plus R to bring that up. And those hotkeys can be configured in the Configure Control section for Monk's TokenBar if you want those to be bound to different keys. We also have the concept of the contested roll here. So if you click on this and you have two actors selected, you'll have them for versing each other in a contested roll. And you have those same roll modes as before, the option for flavor, and also if you want to hide those NPC names from your players. Then you can choose what ability or skill, etc., or die value for people to roll against each other. And then again, select between either request with roll or just request. And then we will roll. And here it's a strength check, and although they got the exact same result on the die, Ventress has a -1, and you'll see that this has indicated that the bandit has the check mark for passing or winning the roll, so it will also indicate for you who was successful in that contest. The final feature directly on the bar that we're going to talk about is this Assign XP button. If you do this with no token selected, it's going to automatically have all of your player tokens on the scene in this Assign XP option. Then up at the top, we've got our experience that we're awarding. So you can put this at 500, say, and then we have options for how we're dividing it. The default is divide XP among players. You can choose do not divide XP, which will just mean this top number, so 500, will just be given to everyone. There will be no modifications to it. You can also choose divide XP among players, which will then make it an even distribution. Then you can also choose to divide it with a larger share to the lower level or a larger share to the higher level. This is something that you may want to pay attention to on how it's exactly deciding to distribute these things, because if you have multiple people all at the same level, then it can still result in some imbalances between who's getting what amount of XP. You can also just completely ignore this top section for dividing the XP, and you can simply manually enter how much experience each character is going to be awarded. You'll notice there's also a Monsters tab, and if you were to select a monster or an enemy and use this plus button to add them here, and then you use the Recalculate XP button, it's going to check and see, okay, a bandit is worth 25 XP in the system, and that is going to be the new amount that we are dividing across all of our players. Now, with the monsters and using that for calculating experience, if you open up your combat tracker and you run a combat and you finish that, it will automatically tally up all of the monsters for the Assign XP there. So I would recommend just using the automatic version there rather than doing this individually, because then you have to make sure you have all the different monsters selected, etc. But that is an option for you if you would like. And then you can either auto-assign, where it will just automatically update onto their character sheets, or you can hit assign, which gives the option for the buttons to hit add on the experience. Additionally, there is this option here for the reason that you're assigning the experience if you would like to do so as well. If you do have a player character selected, then they're going to show up here for the actors, and you can add additional actors by just hitting this add actor option here and do add selected. You can also choose use players or use active players, or do use initial actors, which just basically gets you back to whatever you started with when you opened up the window. That's all of the basic features that we've got on the bar, which does seem like a lot for basic features. We're able to pan around to the different tokens, check out their stats, request some roles, control their movement, and assign XP. There are some additional features if we right-click on the tokens, and we'll discuss these more in depth as we're going over some of the things that Monk's TokenBar does for us in the combat mode. So we'll hop over to a new scene and take a look at combat and some of those right-click settings. So here we are on a new scene. We've got a couple of bandits that are captain and our heroes. I'll start things off by adding everyone to the combat tracker, and we'll begin this encounter. First, you'll notice that the movement has been changed to the combat turn. This means that your players are not going to be able to move their tokens except during their turn. And you can see on the bar here that we actually have the combat turn fist icon here now highlighted, whereas before we couldn't even click on that. You can now freely toggle between any of the movement modes, including that combat turn, as long as you have an encounter active. So I've gone ahead and rolled initiative for everybody. And with this, you'll also notice that there is the addition of this allow movement option on the combat tracker. And basically, you can select this on an individual player so that then, say, if they have a lot of things, or say they have reactions or other things that allow them to move a lot outside of their turn, they can do so without having to be their turn. This is also useful if people have to do a lot of cleanup, etc. You'll also notice a little icon here on Angus. And you can do this whole allow movement option from the combat tracker or from that right-click menu we discussed earlier. You can choose then to also set this to combat turn, and since that mode matches the default mode for the entire token bar, it's going to not have an icon. But if you change it to something that is not the default, it is going to disappear. Something to note is that if you have this set to whatever the default is for the token bar, it's going to lose that icon. It's not going to persist. So if we set this back to combat turn and switch to combat turn for the main movement, that icon disappears. If we go back to free movement, it does not reappear. So it will go away if everyone is made to match that kind of movement. Also in here, we have the options to private message. So you can just automatically autofill in the whisper option to be able to whisper to our players if there's something that only they get to notice in combat, etc. We can also choose to exclude a token from the token bar. We can also edit the character, which will automatically open up their character sheet. It will not put it into edit mode if your system has a specific edit mode option to it. You can edit the token, which will open up the token configuration for them. We also have the option to edit stats, and these are going to be separate from the ones that are tracked for everybody. So in this case, everyone's AC and passive perception are being tracked. This would be just for Angus. So I'm actually going to switch over to Gomer as a spellcaster, and I'm going to add another stat, and this is going to be attributes.spell.dc, and so this will be his spell save. And we'll hit Save Changes. And we'll see now Gomer has 3 stats tracked: his armor class, his passive perception, and his spell save score of 14, or spell DC rather. So you can use this to track additional information if that's really useful. And of course, you can also delete these entries and save the changes as well. For edit stats, we can also add inspiration directly. And as you can see on Angus's character sheet, we have the little inspiration pip. There is a setting in the module settings to make that displayed on the tokens as well. You can also disable the panning, and this setting is not on by default. You normally don't have this from the drop-down menu. You have to turn that on in your settings and then refresh. Basically what this does is, normally if I click on Ventress and Gomer, it will pan to them. But for Angus, if I click on him, it will not pan to him. What's useful in combat here is you can also use this for targeting. So you can see now I have things targeted. I'll pan over to him to make it a little easier to see. So I have him targeted, If you target again, then it just keeps them targeted. This also allows you to multi-target pretty quickly. So you have everyone nice and targeted. Now when it comes to unselecting them, you are still going to have to use something like double tapping T on a target, etc., in order to clear those. Then again, you have from the drop-down the movement options if you want to change those as well. So those are all options for the tracker here. And again, we can do that exclude option. And this might be a good time to also mention that if you want to add a token to this tracker that's not normally there, you can do include on here. And you can also then remove them in the same way of hitting exclude token. Note that this is not going to change the option here on the show on TokenBar. It's just removing them for right now, so you do have to update that token if you want that to not happen again. But this is particularly useful if you want to add, say, a NPC that's traveling along with the party that the party is not an owner of, but is a traveling companion or something like that, that you want to be able to hop around to nice and quickly. Now, for combat, most of the features of Monk's TokenBar are going to be in the aftermath of the combat. So if we go through here and we'll just assume that the heroes are victorious and the bandits lay defeated. Now, if we end the encounter, we have the option to end this encounter and empty the turn tracker. We'll go ahead and hit yes, which will clear everything out. And then we have these options. So first we have the assign XP, and we can see from the monsters that's automatically set up, we have 2 bandits and a bandit captain. Their XP is worth 25, 25, and 450 respectively. We have our 3 players, and our default option is divide XP among players. You can change that in your settings as well. And then the reason is automatically filled out for us of combat experience, and it's got that total of 500 for us. So we have all of that. So we can assign, which will give us this pop-up where we can individually hit add. Auto assign will automatically put it onto their character sheets. Then we also have distribute lootables. This is an integration with the item piles module, and of course, in order for this to work, your system also has to have a item piles module integration. And here you are able to create loot entities, and I have this set up to only use the defeated enemies for this. And we are able to set things up here where you can create the actors and loots here, and this will also create a canvas object that people can interact with it. You can also choose whether to hide the combatants afterwards or not. And here we have options to delete the entries. We can also change the quantities on anything, and also calculate the gold based on the challenge rating for the D&D 5e system. Again, that's going to vary depending upon what systems you're using. But then we can also reset loot if we are just pulling from the particular characters and all of that. And then when you're all ready, you simply hit create new lootable. And now we have this loot item. And when we go in here, this is a GM's view, but we can see the whole contents, and now the players can actually go in and grab these items out of here. So you have all of the loot here, and you have all of the currency in place as well. Monk's TokenBar has a few integrations with modules like item piles. There's also integrations with Monk's Enhanced Journal, which does kind of the same function as item piles. It's going to create a lootable object out of the defeated NPCs. There's also a integration with Monk's active tile triggers. So if you have an active tile and you go into your trigger section, for the actions, there is a section dedicated to Monk's TokenBar where you can do assigning XP, changing movement modes, and then also making requested rolls and then redirecting the results from that rolls in order to add some extra functionality to your active tiles based upon the results of any of those rolls. So it allows you to make more complex traps, etc., utilizing Monk's TokenBar. If you want to learn more about the integrations that are available for Monk's TokenBar, there is a wiki page dedicated to Monk's TokenBar that will link in the description. It's also a part of the same kind of mother wiki for Monk's active tile triggers and the rest of Monk's modules, but there's some additional documentation there regarding the integrations going on there. That covers the features for Monk's TokenBar. Now let's wrap things up by diving into the settings here, and we'll go through just the important pieces that you need to know about. When it comes to Monk's TokenBar, there are a lot of different settings to customize your experience. Most of these are fairly self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go into everything here. I'm just going to highlight the things that I think are really good for you to know, or the ones that really add some extra features here that might be easy to miss. The first one is going to be Edit Stats, and that's going to be what's tracked on the token bar. You can see here we have this attributes.ac.value, and it has a shield icon, and then skills.prc.passive. So in D&D 5e, these are the default things being tracked by the token bar, and they're going to be the armor class and passive perception of the tokens in the bar. So we can see here all three of my player tokens here and their values. If you want to change these in any way, you can do that here. You can change the icons, the colors, or what's being tracked. You can also add additional ones by using this plus button. So for example, here I'll do skills.inv.passive. And this is just whatever the data path is for the system for either skills or attributes, etc., that you want to track. When it comes to setting or changing the icon, just click on the icon and make sure it's orange, and it's loading up this relatively large icon picker. And as you can see here, there are a ton of options, and you can search through here. Like I'm going to look for a magnifying glass for the investigation. When I hit Save Changes, it'll add that row here for things to track. Next, some of the important things are whether you want players that are online or not to have their tokens show up. If you have show offline like I have here, all three of my owned player characters are going to be in my bar. And if you don't want people who aren't there to be present, then you can have that turned off. Then you also have show actors. And this allows the player character actors to show up in your bar whether they're on the scene or not. This is really nice if you do a lot of theater of the mind scenes where, in the game, everyone is present for this particular scene, but on the canvas, you might not have a token representing that actor. So this allows you to still have the really quick reference for what their different stats are that you're tracking, and a really nice, easy double-click option to open up their character sheets if you need something like that. Then you can also disable the token bar entirely, and you can adjust what the double-click action is. So by default, it's that open character sheet. You can also change it to be a request saving throw. So the use token scaling setting might be a little unintuitive at first glance. You might think, okay, what exactly does that mean? And this is saying for the token that shows up in the bar, whether you're going to use the token scaling setting to determine the size of the token. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And then if I configure the appearance of the token, so here on Gomer, I'm going to increase the scale to 3, and we'll take a mental note here of what the size looks like on the bar. We can see he's obviously substantially larger on the scene. And if we refresh, you'll notice that the icon is substantially larger here. So in this case, we're using a pretty extreme example of a scaling factor of 3 rather than 1. And in most situations we're using that scale, you might be closer to the 1 to 1.5 kind of range. But it's useful if, for whatever reason, the token image that you're using has a lot of white space around it and you're increasing the scale of it to be able to fit nicely on a grid square on the canvas. Then you can also then apply that over here so that they have a more representative size on the bar. And again, you may need to refresh anytime you're doing that scaling. For that, the next thing I want to point out is this show resource bars. So if we save changes there, then you'll notice that we have our 3 tokens. And in order for the resource bars to show up on the Monk's token bar, they need to have some kind of display put in. So I just like to use when controlled on these. And as long as that is specified, then they will be tracked. So as long as there's some way to display the bars, it doesn't matter if it's when controlled or always for owner, hovered, etc. As long as there's some way that it's shown other than never displayed, then those bars will show up. So useful if you want to keep track of HP at a glance or whatever else you're tracking with those resource bars. You can also choose whether or not you want to have the token image or the actor portrait for representing them in the bar. Then this disable panning option, this is off by default, but I've gone ahead and turned it on because it does require a reload to take place. Normally, whenever you click on a token with the token bar, it's going to pan and keep that token centered. If you right-click on a token and then choose the disable panning option in the bar, then when I'm clicking between Gomer and Ventress, it's still panning, but clicking on Angus, it's not going to move the scene at all. I'm not going to re-pan over to him. Instead, it's just a selection. So if you think you may ever decide to use that feature, then I would suggest turning it on, because if you don't end up using it, then it's just an empty option here on your sidebar, but you have it there for you if you want it. For the movement settings, I want to call out specifically this notify on movement change. By default, it's going to give you a notification up here every time that you're changing movement. If you're doing that a lot, then maybe you don't want to notify, but it's also kind of useful for your players to know about it. I just want to call that out if you want to change that. Then really importantly, we have this change movement to combat. So whenever you have a combat encounter start, it's going to turn on the turn-based movement, as we discussed before. So if you have a system or you have a module that already takes care of managing when players can move during combat or something like that, then you may want to turn this off, as it can cause some issues with how those play together. Then I also want to call out then the set movement after combat, and you can choose here whether you want to change from the combat turn movement back to free movement, or to no movement, leave it in combat turn, or ignore. So in that same instance where you're turning off the change movement to combat because of a system or other module interacting there, then you would want to set this to ignore. That way you're not stepping on that other module's toes if that's what you're trying to use for managing that. If you are using an integration with, say, item piles or Monk's Enhanced Journals, then the lootable section is where you need to configure that. By default, the show lootable menu and only use defeated are going to be turned off, and the distribute enemy loot is going to be on do not convert. So you'll just want to turn these two settings on. At least I would highly recommend using the only use defeated. Otherwise, if an enemy escaped or something like that, then it is going to still generate a loot pile or add to the loot. And it can also be kind of a pain when it comes to testing these combats or something like that, or testing any of these features, because you're just generating loot sheets or loot pieces all the time. So anyway, decide on your distribute enemies loot method, whether that's item piles or MEJ, etc. And then depending upon your method, you'll have some additional settings to configure here, such as where you might create your actor, and whether the loot entity is going to be opened automatically for anybody, and whether or not you're creating something on the canvas, or you're going to have it separate that you're going to show to players, or you want to drag it in yourself. So those are all options available to you. So check that out if you're wanting to use a loot integration. Then everything else is fairly straightforward, whether you want players to be able to request roles, or it's things about positioning, or what kind of permissions you want players to have. But those are the main settings that I want to make sure to call out here, because they're the things that are most likely going to either be easy to miss with really helpful features, or are going to be things that can have perhaps unexpected interactions with other modules that you can then turn off or adjust to your liking. And that's going to conclude our showcase and tutorial on Monk's TokenBar, the number 19 most popular module for Foundry. We hope that you found this video educational and informative. We think that Monk's TokenBar is an excellent module for being able to keep things at our fingertips when we are running games, and the extra integrations with things like item piles and Monk's active tile triggers just make it that much more sweet. But let us know in the comments what you think of the module, and if you learned anything new in the process of watching this video. I've been Zephyr, and this has been the BaileyWiki channel. If you enjoyed this video, then subscribe to keep up with all of our latest content, and consider becoming a patron. Not only do you support the channel, but you also gain access to all the modular systems and scenes that we've made for FoundryVTT, including the ones showcased in today's video. Once again, this has been Zephyr. Thank you so much for watching, happy gaming, and have a good one.